So welcome. My name is Jamie O'Connor, and I'm with Family Voices of Minnesota and Connected. Our webinar today is Connection for the New Parent Advocate, from diagnosis to discovery to hope. Before we get started, I wanted to just say a few quick things about who we are at Family Voices of Minnesota and Connected. Our primary focus is to provide information and assistance to families who have children with special health care needs. One of the ways that we do that is through our parent-to-parent peer support network. We have over 180 volunteer support parents throughout the state of Minnesota, as well as staff members who are all parents of children with some type of special health care need. We offer emotional support, understanding, acceptance. We offer encouragement and education, and again, information and resources. Family Voices of Minnesota is the state affiliate for the National Organization of Family Voices, and we're also the state alliance member of ParenttoParent USA. Again, today our webinar is for new parent advocates, although in preparation for this I found, I consider myself somewhat of a veteran parent, and I found the process even to be encouraging. So I think this webinar is for any parent advocate. And our presenters today are all parents of children with some type of special health care need, and I'm going to do a quick introduction for each of them, and then I'll let them introduce themselves and tell more about their family and their initial diagnosis. So Terry is a parent support navigator at Family Voices of Minnesota. And this is her beautiful family. Terry, do you want to go ahead and introduce your family, and then I'll move on to Trisha and we'll go back to our diagnosis story?
Sure. So my name is Terry. I have Allison, who is now 11, almost 12, and I have Aiden, who is 9. And then that's my husband, Dan, that's there too.
Also joining us today is Trisha Brisbine, who's our program coordinator of Family Voices of Minnesota and Connected. Trisha, do you want to introduce your family?
Sure, thank you, Jamie. This is myself and my husband, Andy, and the 3 tallest children, which 2 are taller than me already, are my stepchildren, Marissa, who's 16, Drew is 13, Sadie is 11, and the little guy in front is my son, Charlie, who is 9.
Thank you, Trisha. Also joining us today is Sarah St. Louis, who is a volunteer support parent for Family Voices of Minnesota. And Sarah, I'll let you introduce your family here.
Thank you. I have 2 boys. My oldest there, he now is blonde, so the picture with the blonde hair is most current. That is Traven, and he is 17 years old. And the little guy is Ezra, and he is 7, and he will be 8 next month.
Welcome all of you, and I really appreciate you joining us to share your stories and experiences. As a quick background, this webinar was born of a larger discussion that we often have when we're together, and parents of children with any type of complex need is how we found each other and how we found so much hope and support in connecting with one another, and how our stories began and how they're so different, but then also how we seem to be in stride so often. So we were just thinking this could be of encouragement to families who are still looking for that hope and the light. So I want to start off by putting just some questions to the panel members, and hopefully we can start off kind of round robin and go from there. But my first question is, what is your diagnosis story, or how did you find out that your child had a special health care need? Trisha, do you want to start?
Sure, thank you. I was a single mom finishing my master's degree when Charlie was born. He was born just 2 weeks early via C-section, and he came out a little small, but otherwise appearing quite healthy. At about 2 weeks old, we saw the pediatrician because his stomach was distended to one side. So they did some scans, and they found out that he had some motility issues and constipation. So when we were going to see a doctor, a specialist for that, they did some scans and found out that they also noticed scoliosis, or curvature of the spine. When we went to another specialist, an orthopedic, to take a look at the curvature in his spine, they also noticed in those scans bilateral hip dysplasia. Along the way with the motility, we also learned about Charlie having grade 3 reflux. We noticed some tone issues, and then overall there were some delays meeting his milestones. So it really kind of came on gradually, the diagnosis, and after multiple specialty appointments trying to figure it all out but not having a true diagnosis or answer, it was around age 2.5 when we met with genetics and determined that Charlie has a very rare chromosome deletion, and that was most likely the cause of his global developmental delays. He also has been diagnosed with ADHD. And on kind of a side note, I probably had over a dozen specialists that we were seeing from 2 weeks on till age 2. And it wasn't till probably late, just right after my son turned 2, that I really identified as being a parent of a child with a special health care need. So I was going through all of this search for the diagnosis, just kind of moving from one thing and one system to the next.
Thank you, Trisha. I think, so many families don't get a direct diagnosis, and it starts with just a gut feeling. And Terry, wasn't that partly your experience, at least with your first?
Yes. So both of my children are adopted, and they do have the same birth mom. When Allie was around when she started talking and you start doing the animal sounds and that kind of stuff, I noticed that sometimes she could tell me what a cow said and sometimes she couldn't. And I thought that was really odd because I'm a speech therapist, and usually once kids get that, they kind of get it. So we were starting to suspect, some sort of delay at that point. When she was around 3, she started having some unusual sensory issues. Like, first she moved from her bed to sleeping on the floor. She would only sleep on the floor. And then she would only sleep on the carpet on the floor. And then she would only sleep naked on the carpet on the floor. And so as this kept progressing, that was getting more and more concerning. So then we started her in OT, and they were noticing some other sensory issues. And as we were dealing with that, some talk of fetal alcohol did come up. And we had questioned the birth mom all along about this, and she, denied drinking. But when she was 5, we finally decided to go in and get the official diagnosis. And I was pretty certain at that time, after all the research that I had done and all of the things that we had been trying and, weren't sticking, that, we were going to get that diagnosis. So although it wasn't shocking, it was still pretty hard to accept. And then my son came along. He was born 2 years later, and so we were watching him very closely, but he was smart as a whip. He wasn't showing these sensory things until he turned around 4, when he started getting really aggressive and having a hard time making friends and dealing with friends, and we couldn't keep him in a daycare or a preschool. So we were really struggling with some big behaviors with him, and so around the age of 6, we took him in and got his diagnosis.
Thank you, Terry. Sarah, I hope that you'll share your story as well, because I know that yours is quite different from the first two.
Yeah, thanks. Well, mine was a specific day that I learned. My son Ezra, on February 6, 2013, I dropped him off at daycare like I did every day. He was born a neurotypical child. He was very healthy, on track with all his milestones, everything. And that morning I dropped him off at daycare and went to work like I did every other day. And I got a phone call a few hours after I got to work that Ezra had been in a car accident. And it was surprising to me because the daycare lady wasn't allowed by the state to be transporting him. And she had gotten a used car seat and had installed it incorrectly and then wrapped her vehicle around a pole. And on the side that Ezra was on, Ezra went flying. The car seat went flying, and Ezra was thrown back and forward. And became unconscious. The first responders there, Ezra wasn't, they had to had to resuscitate him at the scene. He needed to have a tube put in to breathe. He had large amounts of auto glass stuck into his forehead because the window had shattered. He had brain damage that they could see, and he was unconscious. He had a Glasgow Coma scale of 3, which if he'd been an adult, they simply would have just pronounced him dead at the scene. But they rushed him to the hospital, and I got to the hospital. It took them a while to find me because the daycare lady had told them that she was his mom. And so when I got there, they were working on him, and he had several cranial fractures, a hematoma, which is a pool of blood in his brain, about the size of a volleyball. He had severe traumatic brain injuries. And then later, the next day, he started having seizures in the hospital, which is common for those that have brain injuries. He also had nerve damage to one of his eyes that we didn't find out about until about a year after his injury, because he kept tilting his head to the right, and that made us take him in to see an eye professional, and they discovered the nerve damage, and he had to have surgery for that. He's also has a diagnosis of ADHD and has cognitive and developmental disabilities along with physical disabilities.
Thank you so much, Sarah, and thank you, Terry and Trisha, because I know that these are stories that we're used to telling, but they're not easy always to talk about, so appreciate it. I want to put the question to all three of you about what was the emotional impact of diagnosis or discovering that there was an issue, and then knowing that all three of you have been on this journey for a bit, I'm also curious how that grief has changed or recurred throughout your journey. Sarah, do you want to go first?
Sure. I mean, my initial response was just shock, and I just didn't believe that my child was, in this PICU fighting for his life, and then I became really afraid because I didn't know if he was going to live or if he was going to die. And as the days kind of went on, it was kind of, just getting through each day and just kind of fearful, not knowing what was going to happen next, what happens when we leave the hospital, all these different things. And I really just struggled. I was angry. I did a lot of these what ifs, I should have done this instead, or these different things. And as the years go by, I still, honestly, I struggle with it at times. I'll see kids his age that are doing all the things that kids his age are supposed to be doing, and he can't quite do it. And, you kind of just, your heart just kind of sinks, and that grief kind of sets in. And I have what I call these grief anniversaries, and it's a day, like always February 6th, always is a tough day for me. And anytime I hear an ambulance, I see a car accident, I hear somebody else has a brain injury. It just takes me back to that moment and falling on my knees in that PICU and begging them to save my child. It'll come up and it'll just hit me out of nowhere. They don't happen as often as they used to, and I'm kind of learning that I need to start embracing these grief anniversaries, these moments of grief, and realize that they're not necessarily a bad thing, but they're something that I can learn from, and I can make a positive impact in lives of others with this, and being able to share that and talk about the grief, because people, a lot of times I think in society, grief is taboo and we shouldn't talk about it. And I think it's really healthy to talk about it, and especially when you have a child with a diagnosis, whatever that is. You still mourn that child that you thought you were going to have, or you thought they're supposed to be who, you had this plan and that plan changed. And I think just as the years have gone by, I don't know that it gets easier, but it gets more tolerable, and you learn how to work through that grief. And I think that's really the best that you can do.
Thank you, Sarah. And it is that second part of remaking a life and recognizing that grief is not the only part. Terry, you want to go next?
Sure. So when my daughter got diagnosed, as I said, it wasn't really shocking, but it's still hard to hear those words that your child is going to be forever struggling, with things that other kids typically will get to do. It was actually almost a little harder getting my son's diagnosis, because he was so smart, and he appeared so typical until about the age of 4 that I was almost getting into okay, I think he's okay. I think he's going to make it. He's not affected, and then his behaviors and stuff were so different than what Allie presented that I still wasn't quite convinced that that's what it was. But I knew I had to get it checked out, and so his was almost harder to accept, because I really just wanted one child who was typical, who wasn't going to have to fight for everything in their life. But as Sarah said, as you go through, I don't have grief anniversaries so much because I didn't have a big event like that, but I grieve a lot of, like she was talking about, like in the park, when you see kids in the park doing typical things. My son has never been in any sort of music, concert. He's never done that, because he can't do that. My daughter can do that, but he's never been in one. So all those, kindergarten, first grade, those second grade little songs where they get up there and sing, he's never done that. Getting invited to birthday parties and getting invited to play at friends' house, and those are some things that my kids never experience because nobody invites them over. Sometimes we can have them here, but so it's a lot more of that day-to-day stuff that hits me every once in a while that just makes me so sad, because they're aware that they're not like other kids, and they're aware that friends are hard and that everybody else has friends and does these things. And my kids look typical. If you saw us walking down the street, nobody would guess that there was, the struggles that we have. And so there's a lot of judgment placed when, they are having meltdowns because of their age. They shouldn't be having, 3-year-old temper tantrums, but sometimes they do. And so there's a lot of judgment, and so there's a lot of grief that I can't always depend on taking my kids, shopping or, to concerts or to events where, other people would typically take their kids. Or we're not in sporting events because that's just too much. My daughter can't understand the process of how a sporting event works, playing in sports and team turn-taking and being on a team. And my son just can't handle it because he gets too aggressive. And, if he's not winning, then the other players are cheating, and, then he gets violent. So there's a lot of those kinds of things that I grieve. But like Sarah said, too, you have to learn to kind of embrace what your kids can do, you know, and my kids are very loving and they're very compassionate people, which some kids with food alcohol never gain empathy and compassion and aren't able to attach to other people. But my kids do have that. So I just embrace that what we have is our small family and try to make the best of those things and try to experience things in smaller pieces. And, you know, hopefully we can make good memories that way. And so, yeah, that's kind of how my grief process works.
Thank you, Terry. Trisha?
Sure. So I think initially I grieved the loss of the dreams I had for my child, and I know that the other participants had talked about this, but, you know, having these ideas that this baby's going to be born and he's going to grow up to be the next, you know, brilliant researcher who can cure cancer, or maybe, you know, Major League Baseball player who's just got athleticism oozing from his pores. And, you know, reality hits, and I think that's probably for most of us. But then it reoccurs, that grief of the loss of the dream. I think it happened for a long time every time I went on social media, and it was some of my friends who would be talking about their children that they had about the same time that my son Charlie was born. And they would start talking about, oh, my baby met, you know, his or her milestones, or my child did this. And, you know, I was noticing that my son wasn't even close to getting those. In fact, it was really uncomfortable. And so I would experience and encounter that grief every time I went on social media. So I had to kind of just limit myself to that. And to this day, it's not a bad idea. But I also, like Terry, revisit some of the feelings, and Sarah, revisit some of these feelings of grief when I watch Charlie around his peers, and he's often left out of the conversation because, you know, he can't process as quickly and participate in the conversation, or, you know, not getting invited to his friends' birthday parties and things like that. Really hurts my heart. But I have learned that instead of feeling absolutely powerless over those situations and sad, I've learned strategies to better support Charlie in social situations, and to also find some, you know, really great joy in all of the positive attributes and strengths Charlie has. And I think that's been a really great way for me to work through some of that grief, is to really focus on the positive and focus on what it is we can control. You know, maybe facilitating and supporting Charlie in those situations to learn how to have more social interactions will be, you know, something that we can work on, and it gives me some hope.
So all three of you shared your stories with really great recall and a lot of poise, but I know that for most of us, when we first started sharing our news or the stories or our suspicions, we were still very much in the learning and grieving phase. So I'm hoping you can all talk about what it was like to first share your news with loved ones in the beginning, and how that experience has changed into what you're able to do here today on this webinar. Trisha, why don't you go?
Sure. So a lot of people in my circle knew that Charlie was experiencing some health concerns, and they'd ask how he was doing. And I knew when people asked that question, typically they didn't want all of the details and the nitty-gritty. It felt like sometimes they were just asking to be polite. And so I wanted to give them a very polite answer, and so I'd give them whatever was the most recent positive nugget of information that we had from our most recent appointment, whichever one that might be. I found that actually sharing my fears and my anxieties with loved ones and friends made them really uncomfortable. And I then saw a lot of those relationships change and distance, and it became very lonely. So I think that what I did in the beginning was really kind of give people an edited version of what I needed them to hear, and that was kind of a protective mechanism. On the flip side, and the really sad part of that is that I was very alone because I wasn't letting people in to know what it was I needed.
Thank you. Sarah, would you like to share?
Sure. Because Ezra's diagnosis was so sudden, I just remember calling my mom on the way to the hospital, just crying. I mean, I didn't know his diagnosis at the time. All I knew was that it was really bad and I needed to get to the hospital quick. And then when I got to the hospital and I kind of found out what was going on, and I started making a few calls to other immediate family and extremely close friends, I think I just wanted somebody to wake me up and tell me this was just a really bad dream. And it wasn't. And then I started sharing what was happening at the hospital with Ezra, updates on social media to let people know. And I found, like, in the beginning, people really wanted to hear and really cared. And as kind of, I've kind of found that disabilities have a time limit with people. Trauma has a time limit with people. And it seems that they tend to drop off and they don't want to hear as much. And I think that that's kind of hard because you listen to everybody else share, as Trisha mentioned earlier, all the great things our kids are doing. And I tend to be a very honest person, and that, I share my grief and I share my joys. And I think that that's kind of partially moved me forward, and that I've never been ashamed of Ezra's story because it's our story, and we have the right to tell it. And I tell it now because I don't want other families to feel like they're the only ones going through this, and that, it really breaks down barriers and opens up dialogue. And the more that people find out about things, the less scary they become, and the less people are afraid to be around somebody with that is different than them. And I've just found that sharing our story, it's really about it's showing that his disabilities are just small attributes of who he is in the bigger picture. And he's an amazing young man. He fought death. He fought to prove doctors wrong about his diagnosis and the way they labeled him of how his life would be, and how he's fought the low expectations that people had for him. And I think that that's part of our story too. And his injuries and his disabilities are just one part of our story. They're an important part of our story, but they help build bridges and bigger tables to invite more people to our lives, and to understand that, just because you have a diagnosis of something or a disability, or just who your ethnicity or any aspect of a person's life, it just breaks down those barriers, and people begin to be more inclusive and understanding. And I think that that's, really the important part, that having people that want to listen and are willing to be inclusive in your life and in the lives of your children is really important. And I just think that sharing your story, regardless, the good, the bad, and the ugly, is really important.
Thank you, Sarah. Terry, can you talk about what this experience was like for you, maybe as an adoptive parent? I know I've heard you talk about the invisible piece of your children's disability.
Yeah, exactly. That was one of the things I was going to bring up is it's so hard. It seems like it's harder for family to accept the invisible piece of it. Like I said before, they seem so, if you just look at them and if you talk to them briefly, like they seem like typical 11 and 9-year-old kids until you see the part that is not 11 and 9-year-old. And, my parents raised me, spanking me and, timeouts and groundings and all of those kinds of things that, parents do, and my kids don't respond to any of that. So when I'm with my family and my kids are acting out and I do what appears to be nothing to them, they're like, well, of course your kids are acting that way because you don't discipline them. And really what my kids need is to be, centered and calmed and just brought back to the situation, and then they do fine. They don't need to be, it's not something that they're choosing to do to be naughty. It's something that they just can't handle at that moment, and they need some help, doing that. And so it's taken a long time, and I would say my dad, although he never outwardly, said things to me about the way I raised my children, I could tell that he didn't approve. And I feel like in the last couple of years, he started to come around, and I started to see that my kids do need different parenting than he's used to. And but then on the other hand, with friends and stuff too, I have an 11-year-old who should be able to start staying home by herself, and she can't. She is nowhere near that. And other people with 11-year-olds leave their kids home and go run and do stuff. And I'm still looking for babysitters. So it's just a lot of those things that people don't understand and don't get, how our life is still very different from theirs, and they don't quite know how to respond to that or react to that. And eventually they kind of, just stop calling and stop, like Sarah said, about disabilities and stuff having a timeline. People, like when there's a bad accident, everybody is around you and surrounding you and helping you. But eventually that goes away and people move on with their lives. And we're still stuck here with the pieces of, my child's brain is never going to be better, So we still have the disabilities every day, and we'll always have them for their whole life. The way we treat them and help them will change. And, we hope that there will be some growth. They'll be able to take on some more responsibility on their own. But at this point, we don't know. And so until then, it seems a little endless. And, while most parents are counting down the days until their kids are graduating from high school, I'm looking at maybe 30, my kids will be able to launch themselves. So, that's just something that's just so hard for people to grasp sometimes, and, think that I'm being unrealistic about my children's abilities and have a hard time, accepting that and believing that I know how my children are. So it can be challenging.
In light of how intense the labor is in caring for our kiddos and how intense the emotional load is, I'll put a two-part question to you first, Terry, and then we'll go back around. But what do you do to take care of yourself? And then the other part of that is, how do you find people who understand and stick around and support you?
Well, thankfully, in the Mankato area, there is a huge support network of adoptive families, and a huge part of kids in the adoption system have fetal alcohol. And even if they don't, they have trauma or other things that are very similar, display similar behaviors, and parents have similar issues. So I've been very fortunate to find a group of about 7 of us that are very close. We have an ongoing chat on Facebook Messenger where we can just go and be like, I can't take it anymore. My child is doing this or doing that. And that is so helpful I can just put one sentence out there and everybody on that group knows exactly how I feel. And I don't have to explain it, and I don't have to justify it, and I don't have to, talk about it any more than that. They just get it, and they're there to support me. And, we try to do a lot of stuff together, even simple things like walks. We've started trying to do a movie once a month that's just for parents. but then, or just for the moms, but then we also try to incorporate our families and our kids together, so that they feel like, you know, they have somebody else out there who gets it too. And it's just amazing. Our kids, with all of their anger issues and their disabilities and their, you know, their ability to understand things, like when our kids get together, like there are no problems all day long. These kids can play and just be like, quote unquote, normal kids, that they can't do when they're around, you know, other kids who don't understand what their lives are like. And so we try to make our own little community, and we also, the moms try to go on, you know, like long weekend retreats, you know, like once or twice a year, just to kind of regroup and just have some time to ourselves. And so, you know, it's just kind of carving out those bigger pieces when you can, and then also, you know, something as simple as a movie night just to get away. But I think it's so important to have those people around you that get it and that you can call on and lean on, and they don't need an explanation. They just know. So that's how I do that.
Thank you. I think we would regret if we didn't talk about, and I'm sure that Sarah and Trisha will as well, but about the support that we found through Family Voices as staff, as volunteer support parents, and as parents who often need support. Sarah, do you want to go next and talk about how you take care of yourself and where you find, you know, your tribe?
Sure. With coping, that's something that I really struggle with, is self-care. I'm not the best at that because I'm such a giver to those that need it. And sometimes for me that is self-care, is helping another parent that's going through something, or another individual that is going through a tough time. Part of that is therapeutic to me. I don't know if that's healthy, but to me it is. And I think that has also helped grow my tribe too, is finding or hearing about another family that has a child with a brain injury or seizure disorder, or they've had some form of trauma. You know, just having conversations with people, getting involved with different things like Family Voices. I found them by something on social media. I saw a posting from someone, and I'm like, what is this? And because I really felt alone when I came home with Ezra, and I didn't know people that had brain injuries. I was really the only person I knew with a child with a disability. I just didn't know what to do and who to turn to. And I started, you know, when I started sharing my story, other people started coming out to me and saying, no, I have a child with this diagnosis or this and that. And I found out that someone that I went to high school with has a child with autism. And we started talking, and she invited me to an ARC event to share about an issue regarding families with children with special needs. And from there, I started realizing that I need to advocate. I need to grow my tribe. It can't just be me. And then I found Family Voices, and I thought, this is wonderful. I wish somebody would have told me about this earlier, and met some of the most tremendous people through that. And then I just started doing more advocacy work with different things, and I keep finding more and more people. And when friends all of a sudden have children with healthcare crisis, or just different people that I know or meet along the way, I listen to their stories, and we start building each other up. And I think that is the greatest strength, and is also one of the greatest forms of healing for me. And self-care for me is being able to connect with other families, with other people with disabilities. Just that knowing that I can pick up the phone and I can call somebody and they're going to totally understand what I'm going through, or I can put a message up on social media for different groups that I'm a part of, or parents with children with brain injuries, or just special needs parents in general. People understand. They celebrate your joys and they grieve with you in your disappointments and your difficult times. And I also like just walking around Target by myself. So if you see me there, know that I'm probably doing self-care just by wandering around Target by myself, because I don't really get to do that very often.
I like that. Trisha, would you like to talk about how you take care of yourself? And I know that you have a pretty hefty tribe, so can you talk about all the avenues that you went down to form that?
Sure. So empowering myself as an advocate, I think, is really life-giving for me. And learning how to communicate the challenges we face as families of children with special health care needs to influence the larger systems helps me find a purpose. Family Voices has really helped me learn how to do that as well. So not only have I been connected with other families through this organization, I've also learned how to more effectively advocate for not only the needs of Charlie and our family, but for families as a whole, and like across the state. So that's been really helpful to me. I've also given myself permission to not always be a super mom. And that's another one where I don't know if I'm just too heavily influenced by social media or what. But, seeing other people who can bake this beautiful dessert or cook this wonderful meal and their children are so perfectly dressed, and I sometimes think, what am I doing here? I can barely get out the door with pants on some days. But giving myself permission to just do the best I can and say, you know what? So Charlie hasn't eaten a nutritious vegetable in 2 days, or maybe it's been a couple days since he brushed his teeth. There's always tomorrow, and we can tackle it then. So that's been really helpful to me in self-care. And just being able to find this tribe I think it's easier for me because I am outgoing, and it's easier for me to talk to folks. So I've found my tribe not only through Family Voices, but in waiting rooms, in the grocery store, Target. But I think it's important to remember that it's not as easy for some folks to identify, and so we have to really share the information of how important our tribe can be, and really open the doors so that other families don't feel so alone.
Yeah, I think, I personally have found a great sense of belonging in some of the groups that I've met through my daughter's disability, and that's what I'm hearing you guys talk about. But I think that was something that was not really expected when we first got our diagnosis. And so I'm wondering, for you guys, and Trisha, you can go first, what has been a pleasant surprise for you in parenting a child with special health care needs?
One more thing I wanted to quickly add was that, and I apologize for going back a little bit, but
No problem.
Finding my tribe has made things not just about self-care easier, but it's been helpful to be able to get what I need for Charlie. Just for example, I didn't know what a PCA was till I had other parents talk to me about what it was, how it could help, and how we could access it. Learned about inclusion, which is a big part of what we're doing with Charlie's education now. It saved me money. I didn't know that our insurance would cover diapers after a certain age, and so I stopped paying for Pampers out of pocket. So these connections with other families have been hugely valuable with us. And I think that one of the most positive things that has come of being Charlie's mom is I'm way strong. I've realized that I'm way stronger and more resilient than I ever thought I was. Yeah, I mean, if I ever doubted myself, and still to this day, if I do, I can look at Charlie and I can know we've come a long way, and it hasn't been easy, but we're here, and I'm proud of that.
Talk about what brings Charlie joy. Like, what is he into
nowadays? Like I think this is one of the most important things is, an accomplishment in my life. I can look at what brings, I'll say to Charlie, what makes you happy? And he'll tell me, snuggles with Mommy and my iPad. Hey, I'm in there with the iPad. I know that I'm doing something right, right?
Sarah, same question for you. What has been a pleasant surprise in parenting Ezra since his accident?
Well, I think one of the greatest things is realizing that his disabilities don't define who he is or what his abilities are. When he had his accident, he had lost every ability that he had gained in his first 20 months of life. He had to learn how to breathe and hold his head up and eat and crawl and walk and all those things all over again, learning to talk. And this last year, he started rock climbing. And, I mean, that's not something I ever thought he'd be able to do. And it's so therapeutic for him. We both rock climb. And it's a form of healing, and it's a form of art, and it's a form of kind of giving, the middle finger to everybody that doubted that he wouldn't be able to do anything with his life. And I love that he's able to prove me wrong and prove others wrong. And in the last year, he's also realized that his brain injury is what causes a lot of his issues and a lot of his inabilities to do certain things, and why he has to go to the doctor all the time, which he loves doing, but that he's different. He's realized that he's different. And, just telling him, you're stronger than your brain injury. You can do anything. I mean, you can climb 60 feet with no problems, and there's people with no disabilities that won't even get off the ground. And so I think that is just been the greatest joy, is that he never gives up, and so in turn I can't either. And then, it's really, this journey with him is just really shown what my real purpose in life was, which is to be an advocate, is to help people that are considered less than in our community, and showing how great they are and really how valuable they are and how they can do things that we never expect them to do, but we just don't give them the opportunities or the right supports or the right resources to be able to accomplish these things. And so I think, for both of us, we're so excited to be able to experience life, even if it was different than what I had originally had planned for us. I think it's even better now. And I think that that's been the most surprising and most hopeful and most joyous part of the whole experience.
Thank you. We do want to leave some time for questions, so I'm hoping we don't go too far over. But Terry, I'm hoping that you can share about what's been surprising to you parenting children with special health care needs, and also what's bringing your family joy nowadays.
Sure. One of the most surprising things to me is the people that I've met along the way that I probably would have never come across had my children not had disabilities. And, parents of children who have issues are definitely have a different sort of mindset about how the world works. And that's so much more in line with how I want to live my life. And so it's been great to get to know the people that I would not have otherwise known. And I agree with Sarah, like, advocacy fills me up. I agree. It's a part of my self-care as well. And whether that's truly healthy or not, it it does. It makes me so happy that I can help other people and make their life just a little bit easier. And that I am a strong advocate for my kiddos, and they get what they need because, I'm quote unquote that parent. And but my kids wouldn't be where they would be if I wasn't such a strong advocate. And so my kids are slowly starting to realize how much I stick up for them and help them. And, just recently my son was having an issue, and, he said, "Thanks, Mom, for sticking up for me." And, that just made me so happy. And I think it bonds you with your children in ways that other parents can't truly understand. And so, my kids are, as much as they struggle, we also have gained a lot as well, and they definitely have changed who I am, and for the positive. So that's the joy of it.
So I appreciate all of the sharing here, and this is such a complex and nuanced life. But I'm going to challenge each of our panelists to sort of give some upbeat advice to a newly diagnosed parent in 1 or 2 sentences. And then for anyone who has questions, you can type those in to the chat function now, or you feel free to ask them directly to the panelists right after we go around with the 1 or 2 sentences of advice. Terry, you want to go first?
Sure. My words of advice are to stay strong and never give up, because it's important, and find those resources. Keep reaching out, keep asking questions. No question is dumb, and just keep pushing forward for your children.
Thank you. Trisha?
My advice is just know that you're not alone. Talking to another parent is not just self-care, but it will allow you to find ways to best support your child and access the things that he or she needs to be happy and healthy.
Thank you. Sarah?
I was thinking back to that slide you'd had up. It said grief is in 2 parts. The first is loss, and the second is the remaking a life. And I think that, your child's diagnosis, no matter how grave it is just one chapter in the whole book. And you have the rest of the chapters to write and help change. You might not get to pick, the title of each chapter, but you have the ability to fill in paragraphs and what do you want that book to look like. And the diagnosis is one part, and it's heartbreaking, and it can be life-changing, but it's not the end of the story. It's just the beginning of what could be a very beautiful story.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Trisha. Thank you, Terry. For those of you joining us by audio and web, I'm curious if anyone has any comments or questions. So I would encourage anyone who's interested in being connected with another parent who wants more information, any resources, to please reach out to Family Voices of Minnesota so that you can be connected with excellent parents like the ones that are on our panel today. This is the first part in a 2-part series, and the second part is going to be much more focused on tips and tools, on going to appointments, on advocating, on keeping care notebooks and keeping and sharing records. A lot of information that's great for all of us, but especially is really important when you're just starting off and that's all new to you. So I would encourage you to sign up for that, and I will send a reminder email to everyone that attended. Once we close out the webinar, a survey will pop up, and that is not to annoy you. It is to hope that webinars that we create in the future will be filling needs that our families want. So I would encourage you to fill that out and give us your feedback. It's really important to us. Thank you all again, Sarah, Terry, Trisha. It was really wonderful to hear your stories.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.